So in keeping with our tradition of inspirational keynote addresses, we've brought in a very special guest speaker today from New York. I first learned of Jonsara, Ruth, after reading a piece of high praise in the New York Times about Viniteria, the restaurant and wine bar that she designed in Harlem. The design struck me as subtle, joyful, beautiful, while making use of sustainability in a non-intrusive way, allowing the patrons to first and foremost enjoy the space. We invited Jonsara to speak about her approach and the idea of sustainability in the built world, and to inspire you to think about how you interact with your customers through your spaces. Jonsara is a designer and the founding director of the Progressive MFA Interior Design Program at Parsons, the New School for Design. Charged with provoking change in the field, she leads a symposium, Aftertaste, which gathers expansive perspectives from a wide spectrum of disciplines to bring new definitions to the field of interiors. In her teaching, she draws from practices that both are cutting edges in their ancestral roots and to inform design approaches. Her ideas about designing interior environments focus on exploring and understanding the human experience. As a designer, she's committed to using materials and processes that maximize worker, end user, and planetary health. Sound familiar? Jonsara leads Salty Labs, a collaborative design studio testing experimental methodologies with a foundation in sustainable thinking. Recently, Salty Labs completed the design of a restaurant in Harlem, which I mentioned earlier, which has become a beacon for the neighborhood. Previously, Jonsara was the director of design at Q Collection and Q Collection Junior, a mission-based company that produced the first certified healthy crib for children. There, she enlisted American manufacturers to combine historical quality craftsmanship with materials and manufacturing processes that eliminate risks to human health and the environment. In earlier years, she was the lead designer for Martha Stewart Furniture and apprenticed with several influential artists and designers, including Maya Lin and Tibor Kalman. Her work is seen in hundreds of retail venues, thousands of homes, exhibiting in galleries and museums, featured in publications internationally, and has received multiple awards. Jonsara is a fellow at the McDowell Colony, received a Master's of Architecture from Cranbrook Academy of Art, and a BFA in Industrial Design from the Rhode Island School of Design. Please join me in welcoming Jonsara to Oregon.
Thanks, Chris. And thank you for having me in Oregon. It's really beautiful here. I've just kept walking outside during this conference to see the gorgeous land, which reminds me a little bit of summering in Italy, which I mentioned. I just love this acronym. You all gathered here about LIVE. I can't imagine another better spirited way to think about being on the planet, to remind us that's what we're here for. This is the part of the planet that I grew up on in rural upstate New York. I grew up very close to Seneca Lake, where there are also many small vineyards. The wines are delicious, some of them, and it's beautiful there too, but I promise you that I know very little about viticulture or enology. I have to say that I just learned that word, enology. So I hope that what I prepared for you today will resonate. I do ask you that to try to make associations to what you do. I see the associations, and I hope that you do too, and I'll leave some time at the end to ask questions and maybe have discussion and connect the dots a little bit more. So I'll take you through a little bit of my inspiration. When I looked at the LIVE website, I read, LIVE aims to preserve human and natural resources, seeks to eliminate pesticides and make room for natural wildlife, certifies environmentally, socially responsible wine growing. So I felt the strong connection. I also, in my work, aim to conserve the natural resources, to preserve this wild and beautiful planet that we live on, to nurture the health and well-being of our people and animals. And we also share in the goal to serve human delight. And I hope you'll continue to drink while we talk. I also know a little bit about organic gardening. I grew up with an intimate relationship to compost. And this is a photograph of our backyard, the house I grew up in. Actually, the weeds to your right is where our compost pile was. And when I was growing up, it was really robust. And now that the family's kind of dispersed, it's a little bit hidden there. But wholesome and healthy living was the focus of our family life. My mom grew most of our food in the garden. She canned it, preserved it for the full year. And all the biodegradable scraps from our home and from our kitchen were collected for the next year's harvest. As much as I detested the smell, my understanding of the cycle of growth and how we can nourish the earth and eventually us with our waste was a central principle of my childhood. And now that I look back, I realize that that's really inspired a lot of my adult life and work. The dumping the rotting vegetables was my job in the house. I had to take the bucket out, winter, spring, summer, to that pile. And I have to assure you that it was not my idea of good living. But I grew up with a lot of green, but my inspiration from very early on came from the built world. And when I went to college, I love to visit, but I live in Brooklyn. I live in a very urban setting, and I really dedicate a lot of life to the inside environments. I do believe that all environments, inside and outdoor, directly affect how we feel and our well-being in our life. So I thought I would take you through a bunch of slides which are very inspirational for me and have been for a long time, and maybe I'll show you images. Maybe if we could turn down the lights a little, that would be helpful, because I'm really going to rely on these images to tell the story in a big way. Thanks so much. This is Casa Barragan in Mexico City, designed by the architect Louis Barragan, and he really has studied phenomenology of color and light and how that can create an experience. Actually, how it can create awe. This is his Tlalpan chapel in Mexico City, and I recommend that you go if you're ever down there. Oh, right. I forgot that Chris is turning the slides for you. I'm not doing it here. Yeah, no, that's right. But the color and materials really create this awe. But what are those materials? And this has really been my study. This is plaster. That's what we saw on the altar in the slide just before, with small impressions. It's covered in gold leaf. So actually, can you go back one? Where this creates awe, when we look very closely, microscopically, I like the reference to the microscope of those tiny pests that you can't really see. It's the same with materials. That kind of microscopic view really affects how we feel. And I'm fascinated with these materials and how they create atmosphere and inform our experience. This is a brick wall used as a canvas. And there's all kinds of bricks and all kinds of makeup of bricks. There's metal made flexible with this metal cord. Metal that's crocheted into full-scale, human-scale sculptures. This is by Ruth Asawa. And when they cast their shadows, it creates an entire environment. This is also metal. This is perforated metal sheet. When installed indoors, makes doors transparent. And then there's a complete copper metal environment. And it's pretty funny, actually, that I have a few slides of copper because I think that evokes a certain kind of experience, but now I hear that you're phasing out copper in your farming techniques because it's toxic to wildlife. Actually, the interesting thing is designers are phasing it in because it's a natural antimicrobial. And so if you have a door handle made of copper, it fights bacteria, and the next person who holds that bacteria will no longer live. But I guess that's the point. It kills a lot of things. So there's the contradictions in sustainability lives on. because they're always perplexing. Copper objects, such as a door handle or a lamp. Or textures in metal, textures in copper. These are studies by Herzog and Cameron. There's an architectural theorist in Singapore whose name is Erwin V. Ray, who says, we perceive our reality through materiality. He says that the materials of the built world give us our reality. And we could argue that the materials of the natural world also give us our reality. So there's texture in masonry that feels one way. Textured roof in India. This is Balkrishna Doshi. Or the perceived texture in a terrazzo floor in Miami. Texture in concrete. Or very smooth formed concrete. Or formed plaster walls that shape light and space. Or reflect light and space. Or form that obscures light. Or form that reveals light on its edges. Color, light, space. This is James Turrell. Some of you know this at work. And our students are experimenting with turning space inside out. While other students are exploring transforming spaces entirely. This is a lobby in our building. Some students, just with white paint and cardboard, transformed it into a model of itself. There's designers who are using discarded things to make new places. On the left is old office cabinets, on the right is old light bulbs. And then we're thinking, what does a kitchen really have to be? What are the materials we choose as designers? And how do those atmospheres change when people inhabit them? So space shapes human experience. And the boundaries of that space choreograph our movement within. A window shapes what we see. This is an amazing architect, Lina Bobardi in Brazil. And then we can see this. Maybe some of you know it. This is the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. It's a swirling mass of very small particles of debris and plastic swirling in the Pacific Ocean. When I learned about it, it was 2 times the size of Texas. And when I just read about it recently, somebody said that it was the size of the United States. It's a big, massive patch of garbage full of plastic. The artist-photographer Chris Jordan documented the remains of baby albatross who live on small islands in the Pacific Ocean. And their parents thought that small plastic was food and that it might be delicious. But instead, it's filling the stomachs of these birds, and 1 out of 3 chicks, albatross chicks, die mostly because of this plastic. I understand those parents. I think that the plastic is kind of attractive. This is an artist who took all the plastic and laid it out and photographed it. But most of it is really, really tiny particles. Plastic doesn't biodegrade, as you probably know. It photodegrades, which means that with light, it becomes smaller and smaller and smaller and works its way into all kinds of marine life, birds, fish, and because of the food chain, eventually us. And it's not just floating on the surface of that water, it floats underneath too and makes it nearly impossible to clean up. So these plastic particles are quickly becoming part of our ecosystem. This is part of the Earth. This is a diagram that represents the effective world consumption, and as you can see, our country is blown up. We're beyond the means. We can't consume as much as is produced, and so waste is our problem. So as a designer, and as someone who wants to make new things in the built world, I have to ask myself, why make anything new? Are we making things that are just becoming garbage? And where do the materials, if we are going to make something new, where do those materials come from? And can they go to that compost pile at the end of their life? Will they nourish the soil for the next generation? Unfortunately, that plastic patch isn't going away. So what do we do? So I have been wringing my hands since I learned about this. And this has been my passion and study. Just last September, I spent some time in the Netherlands with some designers. This is an office that's designed by a great firm called Doppel Strijkers. And they've taken on this challenge. Here's an acoustical wall, that colorful wall. Here's a close-up. It's made from recycled clothing that's carefully selected and organized by color. And it makes this great office space. It's about 2 feet thick. It acts as an acoustical wall and a really visually impactful place. They took old doors and made a conference room. Evelyn Merks, who's also an architect in the Netherlands, turned a cathedral that had very, very low attendance in the city, wondering what to do with this beautiful building. And they turned it into a bookstore, which is now very well attended. Evert Verhagen works in urban planning in Amsterdam, and he saved this old gas holder building from destruction and worked with the city, and the city wanted to inhabit it right away. And he said, no, let's wait and let's give it to the artists for 4 years and see what they do. And a bunch of artists said, let's just empty it. It's such a beautiful space. And they made it into this extraordinary event space, which the city has adopted. So we actually can do amazing things with the old stuff. We just have to rethink a little. This, if we come back to our country, maybe some of you know the train station in Detroit. It's become an icon for Detroit. But it begs the question again, what do we do with our existing building stock? This is the inside lobby of that Detroit train station. This is also in Detroit. This is the Michigan Theater. Maybe you know this, which has been turned into a parking garage. I spent a couple years examining a domestic interior ruin in Detroit. This is a kind of a beautiful, deteriorating painted wall. And then we looked very much closer at that paint to see, like archaeologists, to see what remains and what effects are having. So there's a lot of things that we can do, I think, with the materials that we do have. But realizing that Americans spend approximately 90% of their time indoors, we think, what are the materials that's inside, and what is in the air that people breathe indoors? We know that materials and architecture shape experience. They also shape our health. So part of this research has been looking at what are the materials made of. Well, paints and coatings contain methylene chloride. Products of combustion contain benzene and carbon monoxide. Pressed wood products, which is most furniture these days, contain formaldehyde. Most upholstery is treated with halogenated and brominated flame retardants. PVC furniture contains phthalates. A lot of lacquers for floor and laminates contain toluene. We know that dry cleaning products contain perchloroethylene, or perc. And this statistic is kind of frightening, that indoor air is often more polluted than outdoor air. That somebody said you could stand in front of a city bus and breathe in, and that would be better than going inside many places. So then there's this shock. This is kind of shocking. And the next slide is kind of shocking to me. So I just warn you. But these same chemical pollutants are now found inside humans. The Environmental Working Group, maybe some of you are familiar with them. They really lobby for good policy in this country. And they did this study and found that in unborn children, they took the blood from the umbilical cords of 10 unborn children and tested them and found 287 chemicals were common among these 10 unborn children, including industrial chemicals, pesticides, consumer product ingredients, which are like from soaps and lotions and things that we put on our body, waste from burning coal and gas and garbage. And those same chemicals are linked to disease, to cancer, birth defects, hormone disruption. You get the idea. There's also been this increase in childhood diseases like autism, asthma, childhood cancer, developmental disability, that is at the same rate that we have found chemicals in the air and in our environments. So they're linked. This is, to me, these are my motivating factors. What do we do? In every way, our environment makes its way inside of us, inside of humans that haven't even been out in the world yet. So we need to change the way we make things. Luckily, the Earth is on our side, I think, and comes to our rescue for many things. But ancient methods actually help to remediate harmful toxins. Stone-based materials, which come from the Earth, can be used on surfaces and can be used inside and outside, and act like a sponge. The porous surfaces actually absorb harmful toxins from the air and odors from the air. So we can look towards ancient methods, and maybe this is one of the associations with farming, I'm not sure. And then there are exciting new technologies. This is really amazing. I'm totally psyched about this. This is a company called EcoActive is making this product, which is a fast-growing mushroom material. So they make molds, and then I think maybe takes a day or 2 days. They grow this mushroom material into the molds, and then it can be used as packaging. They're also making it so that it can be, there's major furniture companies that are using it as instead of using styrofoam. So they can eliminate styrofoam, they can use this mushroom material, it's passed all the tests for shipping, for trucking, and then in the end you can put it on your compost pile, and it does nourish the earth. They're also using it in insulation for houses, because you can, stick build a building and then grow the mushroom material right in as insulation, and it seals it tighter than other kinds of insulation. It's super exciting. So I can't wait to see what they do. In fact, I want to work with them more. So there are a lot of positive things too. I think this last part that I want to show you is just to share with you this project that Chris talked about earlier, which was this bar, a wine bar in South Harlem. And it's an experiment that I really wanted to try to employ all of these things that we now understand about materials and about air quality and about chemicals. So in this project, we attempted to use only materials that were on their second life, or maybe third life, and materials that do not off-gas. But most importantly, it's a project that attempts to bring communities together, to linger, have a good glass of wine, some food, and really bring on delight. This is a picture of the corner in South Harlem. And South Harlem is quickly gentrifying. The population is changing. People are moving to the neighborhood with expendable incomes, but there's a large population of people who've been there for a long time. And so I really wanted to make a place on this corner where both communities could feel comfortable coming, which is a challenge in itself. And the project had a very low budget. So we did simple things like paint signage instead of buy signage. So I thought I would take you inside and show you how we made this place and show you the decisions that we made apropos to this research. So here's the bar. It was built in the 1940s. It came from a bar in Gramercy Park, New York City. And it brings that kind of nostalgia. You can see it through the big windows. People who are of an older generation would recognize it as a place to sit and be. It's not some new modern idea of bar. On the left is the bar and the warehouse. And on the right are the pieces of the bar at the site, which we reassembled. There, Wesley is soldering a new zinc top over the old kind of wanky wooden one that was there. And 80 on your right, 80 is reconfiguring the woodwork to look like it's custom, but actually it's not custom at all. We painted the back bar to let it recede into the dark plaster with milk paint, which is made from milk proteins. And it's really an amazing material. I don't know if you've used it, but it hardens over time and becomes more and more sealed the more time that passes. This at the end of the bar, the chalkboard on the left was rescued from an old school building in Pennsylvania, and then we cut it down to size. The glass shelves on the right hold a glassware collection of old wine decanters and beer pitchers. And this incredible collector, Fritz Karsch, was a major collaborator on this project, and he scoured the Northeast looking for decanters and pitchers that were $25 or less. And his arrangement is here. They cast this really beautiful shadow on the back plaster wall. Opposite the bar is a cafe, kind of dining area, where outfitted with all kinds of things that hopefully look as if they have a new life here. It's a large mirror from an old hotel. Well, I'll go into detail a little bit more. All of the chairs, we decided the chairs should be, again, have a recognizable cafe feel in the Thonay style. They're collected by Fritz also. And then we arranged them by color to determine which ones had to get new color. And all of the chairs got painted socks so that they could be unified again into a cohesive family, even though where they were found kind of all over the Northeast. And that 9-inch painted sock or datum line was incorporated on the baseboard and on the bottoms of all tables. So the whole place had this kind of unified feel, almost like a flood came and marked the stuff. The front corner windows are made from, the benches are made from old church pews. The rosemary and lavender are growing like wild in the windows to refresh the space. And the lamps are a collection of old milk glass shades that actually was out of production for a while and are now back in production. Here in Portland, I think, Schoolhouse Electric makes them now. Again, but these are all old and found all over the place. The long tables were made from scraps from a fabrication shop, scraps of roasted maple. And the silver plate cutlery was all vintage, again, collected by Fritz. The bar tables the bases we found in an old warehouse basement, and the tops are made new out of recycled aluminum. Those mirrors on the left are collected round mirrors on the wall that reflect the felt wall opposite. The felt is really an interesting thing. So this felt came from a factory in Pennsylvania that makes felt washers. You know, the kind of the washers that you put under chairs, or that are sold for oil burning furnaces, I think. they make felt washers for every use. And then the scraps that are made from the punching are baled into these big bales and burned for fuel in different places. But we took one of those 250-pound bales and brought it back to the studio. It cost $40. And at the studio, we ironed out all the pieces and sorted them and made them into patterns and laid them into panels. And they became the walls. So it's thick, 100% felt, comes from lamb and from sheep. And it acts as a sound absorbent. But wool also has an incredible property that it absorbs toxins from the air. Like the plaster, it's porosity. And so wool is really an amazing thing to use inside. It also absorbs odors, and in a restaurant that's important too. So at the end of that felt wall, looking back at the kitchen, is a metal cabinet to hold metalware. And for this, we bought an old Danish cabinet a guy was selling, not very expensive, mounted it on the wall, and then built metal shelves above it. So the metal shelves were made to the dimension of this found object. And they were filled with old aluminum ice buckets and pitchers and trays. Somehow that metal, I love it. It's some of my favorite things in that place. And then, of course, the arranging of those things on the shelves is really kind of takes expertise. Martin is that excellent plasterer who used an old Japanese method of dyeing the plaster to make this black plaster. And plaster is one of those stone-based materials that really absorbs toxins and odors from the air. So that's what all the walls are. In the places where we couldn't afford plaster walls, we use lime paint, which is mostly lime from limestone. And it has that same quality. It's basically putting earth on the walls. But as soon as we started making plaster walls, I thought, what about frescoes? Could we make frescoes? What's the modern day fresco? And so we thought, wall tattoos. And so we invited artist Helen Quinn to come and paint her intricate portraits of these nautilus. She tells me they're not octopus, they're nautilus. So I trust her. And they're very small, actually. They're only like this big. They're maybe 10 inches by 8 inches. She also made a rhinoceros out of silver leaf on the black plaster wall. And they're just like tattoos on humans. They're extremely noticeable. It's crazy. They're so small, but they have such big impact in the space. The front door, I think of a front door as like the first handshake. It creates the first impression. So it's really important. So I was talking to the owners about this, and she thought, maybe we should replace them. We need to really impactful. If this really is the first handshake, we need an impactful front door. And I thought, these front doors are, they're ubiquitous, they're generic, but they work. Why should we throw out something that still works? So instead, we invited an artist who has been studying perforation in his drawings. And we got his drawings laser cut in aluminum panel and fit to the bodega doors, to those doors that kind of just work. And they weren't square anymore, and so the panels had to fit exactly and had to be measured to those particular doors. But they cast this pattern into the space, which really creates character for the whole place. And they do have an incredible first impression. They act a little bit like that perforated door that I showed you much earlier, but they also cast this light projection on the rest of the space, and on that wall especially, full of glassware. So it's working. This place is a hotbed for activity, and people really enjoy it, and the place is packed most of the time. It works really well as a restaurant too. The chef, Gustavo Lopez, is kind of amazing, so that helps. And as a bar, you can't get a seat. And they have a great sommelier who knows some of your wines too. So it's working. For me, it was a success it was a successful experiment on many levels. Most important, is that it feels like a place that's attractive for these people to come and for the variety of people to come in from the neighborhood. But I also really didn't want it to feel like a secondhand shop, that it doesn't have to shout out about its sustainability, that can be inherent, sure, and that the strategies towards design and towards making things have to be mindful and responsible to the things that we know. But it's the design that's at the forefront. The invitation to come, lose time all together, enjoy the glass of wine in a lively atmosphere. That's the real goal. So it seems like we do have alignments. I think that the wines that I'm expecting to taste in a few minutes, I'm really excited for. And I think the things that you're creating delight for all kinds of people with the efforts that you're doing behind the scenes. And it's really wonderful to share that with you. So that's what I prepared for now. This is one of our many experiments, but I'd love to hear any comments or questions that you might have for me, or to see if any of those associations just work. But thank you.